Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure having you this afternoon on the program. Now let's get right into it. Some general comments on Budget 2020, and also could you respond to the opposition's claim that it's more of a private sector budget?
Sure. The budget debates are going well so far. Extremely pleased that we have been able to have a full debate, full 5 days. Although it's an emergency budget and there's an urgency to get the budget passed, given that the last time a budget was presented to the National Assembly was in November 2018. And a ton of money has been spent, hundreds of billions of dollars. In fact, over $300 billion have been spent since that budget has been passed without any parliamentary oversight. Although we mentioned a bit about this budget, the $330 billion budget, it's a big budget, that a significant part of this budget is because money has already been spent, either through rollover projects from 2019 or through unauthorized spending for 2020. There's another group of expenditure that is not included in the budget that we'd still have to clear. That is the contingency fund. So there's been a drawdown on the contingency fund for 2019, and I've just discovered that it runs into billions of dollars too, outside of the spending from the consolidated fund. So it's both clearing the consolidated and the contingency fund. I'm not trying to get too technical, but a ton of money has been spent without any parliamentary oversight, and much of that spending has gone into areas that are not very transparent. So that doesn't come out enough in the budget debates because it's a bit technical. But when people listen, they must always remember that this budget is a budget that is made up of expenditure for the remaining part of the year, but money already spent and money that is rolled over or project rolled over from 2019. So when Winston Jordan claims that, oh, the fiscal deficit went up, the fiscal deficit went up largely because of the unauthorized spending that they had. And it is not because the PPP came in and put in a budget that suddenly caused the fiscal deficit to go up. We had to put in this budget or to make allowances or to give cover to all the unauthorized spending that they embarked upon for almost 2 years. So that is crucial. Secondly, I hear this trend about almost every presentation from the other side. Nothing else, practically nothing else, excepting that it is a private sector budget. Now, clearly, the budget has to follow an analysis of the situation. And when we analyze the economy, we saw growth in the oil sector, but in the non-oil economy, every sector was in a disastrous position. That is, they were in deficit. So agriculture, forestry, fisheries, bauxite, coal mining, manufacturing, services sector, almost every sector of the economy, hotel and accommodation, all of those things were in decline. So those are the sectors that generate jobs for our people. And you can't just, and then with the COVID situation, it made the situation in those sectors even worse. More people lost jobs. They were already declining, and now more of our people lost jobs. So key part of the budget had to be to give stimulus to those areas to ensure that we resume activities in mining and accommodation and forestry and agriculture, fishery, so more of our people could be employed. Employment is key to the well-being of any country. And so saying this is a private sector budget, but without understanding why you need to stimulate the private sector, the, the sectors of our economy that create job, is a bit disingenuous. It's almost like it's not a budget you're debating. That's a political gaffe. That's a political gaffe. Now, notwithstanding that we gave a ton of incentives for private sector growth and development, and we also focus heavily on the social sector and welfare. So the mere fact that we remove VAT on medicine that they had put there, they had put VAT on medicine, we reverse it. And we even extended the removal to even medicine use and medication use in the private sector. So when people now go to a private pharmacy, they don't have to pay VAT on, first of all, the people who are importing the medication to sell in the private pharmacies or use in the private hospitals, they wouldn't have to pay VAT. So the prices hopefully would be lowered. They are the ones who put the VAT on medicine. So we remove that. We also remove the corporate tax from medical institutions in the private sector, with the belief that if they don't have to pay more taxes on their income, then they will invest in better equipment, and the people will expand private health care, and the cost of private health care will come down due to competition, and we can focus on improving public health care. So we did the same thing for private education. That is not just to allow, or we remove the corporate tax, not just to allow the private sector entities like schools, etc., that are to make more money, but hopefully it would allow the fees to come down for parents who have to send their kids to private school whilst we're upgrading public schools. We also, the mere fact that we are returning the cash grant to the kids, they took that away. That was $1.6 billion when it was $10,000. We brought it back and we increased it to $15,000. So now that will put $2.5 billion back in the pockets of parents, all across this country. Every home that has a child will get that. Well, not just one child, but every kid in public school will get that grant. The pension, although we didn't do it immediately, but from January 1, the pensioners know that they're going to get over about $5,000 more on their pension, which is a massive increase. Remember, we promised to increase pensions, double pensions, but that's over the 5 years period. But right now, just increasing the pensions by $5,000 more for every pensioner will put in the pockets of our pensioners 4.5 billion Guyana dollars more. So that is not private sector. That's for our pensioners. That's for our children. Doubling the school uniform project. Again, the voucher puts another $400 million in the pockets of parents. Removing VAT on our free water for pensioners also puts back about $600 million in the pockets of our pensioners. Who could reason? And these were things that they took away. That's the problem, that they took away all of these things that were there before. We had to come back and reinstate them. And Jordan always claimed he didn't have fiscal room to do this. Oh, we didn't have room in the budget. I need more taxes. I got to take away these incentives from poor people, the cash grants, etc. But we have done it. We've shown that there is room in the budget. We've shown that there is room in the budget. But they had room from everything under the sun, everything else. So I can go down and list for you. And please listen to what our MPs are saying. I can go down and list all the things that would be helpful to the communities. There's a grant that will see a transfer to Gaisuku that will see those 7,000 people that were laid off by APNU. They would start getting back some help, and the industry will hopefully be resumed. We can start reopening those closed estates. And this is not going to help sugar workers alone. For the money spent there goes across our country. Our country is heavily integrated. They think you can balkanize it, think, well, one group of people. Or every cent spent in the economy impacts all of our people, regardless of where you live. So we managed to do that. They said they couldn't do it. Look at the Amerindians. We put $800 million in the Amerindian Development Fund. They cut out a lot of the money there. So they took away $700 million from the village economies when they removed the CSO programs. We're in the process of putting that money back in the village economies. That's not for private sector. We had to budget nearly $3 billion for electricity in Linden. That's not for private sector. So a lot of it's just a slogan. Oh, it's a private sector budget. It's a slogan. But we have no apology for removing taxes on machinery and equipment. People don't eat machinery and equipment. When they buy a piece of machine and bring it in, APNU put the VAT tax on it. There was no tax. A bulldozer, for example. If you bring in a bulldozer under the PPP, it used to be zero tax. Now, when you brought in the bulldozer under APNU, you had to pay over $5 million in taxes. Now it's back to zero. So think about a small miner. Buying a bulldozer now can probably save $5 million and go back into mining. That would they would need operators, they would need a number of people to supply fuel, etc. It creates jobs for people. That's the thinking that they didn't have, a strategic thinking, a strategic vision of the budget. So I'm sorry to be so extended, but the private sector label is just a slogan.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Also, could we talk a little bit on the Pompeo visit, Mr. Pompeo's visit? Also, Mr. Harman said that it's shrouded in secrecy, and they're not getting enough information on
Yeah,
the
sure.
agenda. Could you respond to that, please?
So I've noticed four questions that were put before the speaker from the opposition, and those questions seem to have been written in Venezuela, not in Guyana. That had nothing to do with Guyanese national interest. That's the first point. Then I saw when the speaker refused to treat those, given the parliamentary norms. You have heard the previous speaker, say that any questions raised would have to meet certain criteria before they can be put to the parliament. They refused the questions, and then I saw the speaker disallow them. So Mr. Harman is now lamenting his fate, and that we don't want to share information. And guess what he wants? He wants two things from his comment. He wants the agenda for the visit, and he wants to be assured that we will not do anything to compromise national interests regarding Venezuela. Now, just think about this. And Mr. Harman demands this information. The number of times we requested information in the parliament in the past, even when we followed the standing orders, the procedures, we put the question in writing, they refused to give responses. But just think about it. Which Harman clearly is suffering from amnesia. It's no longer government. You don't share agenda. Can you imagine the audacity of us asking President Granger to share the agenda for a meeting that he had with anybody in the world and bring elevating that to Parliament, especially on a visit from a Secretary of State or the United States of America, where they have themselves issued a public statement which outlines what they are here for. So but it's almost unbelievable that a man who held the position as Minister of State would ask a president to share his agenda with them for a foreign visit. And secondly, even in the period when the APNU was trying to steal the elections, the 5 months period, we still participated in the hearing at the ICJ. We don't trifle with our borders. That's not a political issue. We don't compromise national interests on the border. We've always, even in the most contentious period, extended support to the APNU government on the border issue. And to think now that we have to stand up in Parliament, he wants us to stand up in Parliament and say we will not compromise the national interests on the border. So the ridiculous nature of what kind of information that he's seeking here just points to a different motive. I think APNU is very upset with the stand of the United States of America and especially the Secretary of State in the period or post-election period. I think this is all playing out, and that's why they're acting up on this visit. This is the first time in our history that the Secretary of State is coming to Guyana. This should be from the United States of America. This should be celebrated by our people. It was the same truckman who argued that we had to give ExxonMobil a liberal contract because we wanted an American company in our exclusive economic zone because it was strategic in relation to Venezuela. It helped to defend our sovereignty. That was his claim. You recall that was one of his arguments. Now the Secretary of State of the United States is coming and they support Guyana's territorial integrity. You should be celebrating this. But I suspect they're still smarting from the positions taken by the U.S. in that period. They're peeved about it, so they're acting up. But as the U.S. pointed out, we and you can be assured that we will never do anything that will compromise Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Never. And we have demonstrated this over the many years by our full support for initiatives by APNU, even on the border. So I think we should celebrate the fact that the Secretary of State is coming here, and I see Harman and the others are acting up. I hope that people will get a chance to read the questions that they asked. As I said before, these questions seem to be written in Venezuela. But somebody seems to have given them those questions to ask in our parliament. We have grave concerns. We support democracy everywhere. We have grave concerns about democracy too, anywhere where it's violated, including in Venezuela. But we will defend Guyana's interests and what's good for our people, the Guyanese. That is what is foremost in the minds of this administration, our people. Their interests come first. On the economic side, with the oil negotiations on the border side, our people come first, Guyanese. That's our primary objective.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.